Hey everyone, I never thought I'd end up here, spilling my guts to strangers on the internet, but I guess life has a way of throwing curveballs you just don't see coming. I'm Brian, 34, and I've been married to my wife, Lisa, for nearly 6 years. We met in college, and I was instantly drawn to her fiery personality and the way she could command a room. She was the life of every party, the one who could make anyone laugh, and I thought I was lucky that she chose me. Our relationship was intense from the start. I felt like the luckiest guy in the world, marrying someone who was not only beautiful but also full of energy and ambition. We had our share of ups and downs, but I always chalked it up to passion. Over the years, though, things began to change. There were small signs at first, things that didn't add up, but I ignored them. I trusted her completely, or at least I wanted to. Lately, though, Lisa had become distant. It was like she was always somewhere else, her phone constantly buzzing with notifications, and whenever I asked, she'd get all defensive. Her temper had gotten shorter, too. We'd argue over the smallest things, and she'd storm off, slamming doors and throwing her hands up like I was the problem. But still, I kept telling myself it was just a rough patch. Every marriage has them, right? A couple of weeks ago, she dropped a bombshell. Out of nowhere, she told me she wanted to go to a party with some old friends she'd recently reconnected with on social media. I didn't think much of it, but when I asked if she wanted me to come along, her response caught me off guard. Lisa looked at me with this icy stare and said, "I'm going to this party, and I'm going to sleep with any man I want." I thought she was joking. She had to be, right? But the look in her eyes told me she wasn't. It was like I didn't even know her anymore. My stomach churned, and for the first time, I felt a pang of real fear for our marriage. After that night, everything changed. I couldn't shake off what Lisa had said, even though she later brushed it off as just a joke. But something about the way she looked at me, the coldness in her tone, it was different. I started paying closer attention, watching for little things that I might have ignored before. I guess a part of me was hoping I'd find nothing, that it really was just some twisted joke, and I was overreacting. But then there were her late nights. She'd come home later and later, always with some excuse. "I got caught up at work," she'd say, or, "My friends just really needed me tonight." There was a new group of people she'd been hanging out with, names I'd never heard before. When I asked her about them, she'd just say, "Oh, they're just friends from work. You don't know them." And she'd brush me off like it was no big deal. The worst part was her phone. She was glued to it, always texting, always smiling at something on the screen. But whenever I got near, she'd immediately lock it. If I so much as glanced in her direction, she'd give me this look, like I was invading her privacy, like I didn't have the right to know. It started gnawing at me. My mind was racing with possibilities, each one worse than the last. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. Lisa was asleep, her phone on the nightstand next to her. I knew it was wrong, but I was desperate. I picked it up and, with my heart pounding, unlocked it. She must have thought she was safe because she hadn't even bothered to change her passcode. I started scrolling through her messages, and there it was, everything I'd feared and more. Messages from a guy named Jake. The texts were flirty, playful, and then, as I scrolled further back, they became explicit. It was all there in front of me. They'd been meeting up for weeks, sneaking around behind my back, and she hadn't even tried to hide it. I read message after message, feeling my stomach twist with each word. I'd never felt so sick in my life. There was one message that made my blood run cold. Jake had texted her, "Can't wait to see you at the party. We're going to have some real fun." And then Lisa's response, "Don't worry, Brian's clueless. I'll do whatever I want." I sat there in shock, staring at the screen. She'd planned this, deliberately chosen to betray me, and she didn't even care if I found out. In that moment, something in me snapped. I knew I couldn't ignore this. The next morning, I could barely look at her. I stayed quiet, going through the motions, but inside I was seething. I wanted to confront her right there, let her know I'd seen it all, but part of me wanted to wait, to let her dig herself deeper. I wanted to see if she'd even try to hide it or if she'd keep lying right to my face. I guess I needed to see just how far she'd go. Later that day, I asked her casually, "So, how was the party? Did you have a good time with your friends?" She barely looked at me, scrolling through her phone like I wasn't even there. "Oh, it was fine," she said, not even bothering to look up. "Just the usual." She had this smug smile on her face, like she knew something I didn't. It took every ounce of self-control not to blow up at her right then and there. I decided I wasn't going to let her off that easy. "You know, Lisa, last night, you said some pretty wild things. You said you were going to do whatever you wanted. Sleep with whoever you wanted." I was watching her closely, waiting for her reaction. For a split second, her expression froze, her eyes flickering with something. Was it guilt? Fear? But just as quickly, she covered it up, rolling her eyes and scoffing. "Oh, Brian, don't be so sensitive. I was just joking. You're always overreacting." There it was again, that dismissive, condescending tone. She looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable, like I was the problem. My fists clenched at my sides, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Really?" I asked, because it sure didn't sound like a joke. "You were pretty clear about wanting to do whatever you wanted." She sighed, feigning annoyance. "Look, Brian, maybe if you weren't so insecure, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You're suffocating me with all your questions. Can't I have a life outside of you?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Here I was, catching her red-handed, and she had the audacity to turn it around on me, to make me feel like I was the one in the wrong. It was like she had no remorse, no guilt, just this smug, arrogant attitude, like she didn't have a care in the world. And that's when I realized she really didn't care. Not about me, not about our marriage, not about anything but her own twisted games. "Are you even listening to yourself, Lisa?" I said, my voice low, barely keeping my anger in check. "You're lying to my face, treating me like I'm stupid, and you expect me to just sit here and take it?" She crossed her arms, giving me this look like I was pathetic. "Oh, please, Brian, grow up. If you can't handle a strong, independent woman, maybe you're not cut out for marriage." I felt something inside me crack. I didn't recognize this woman in front of me. The woman I'd married would never have spoken to me like this, never have disrespected me so openly. But here she was, showing her true colors without an ounce of shame. I knew right then and there that things would never be the same. After that confrontation, I felt like I was in freefall. It was as if the foundation of my life had been ripped out from under me, and I was left floundering, desperately trying to make sense of what had happened. I couldn't believe that the woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with could turn into this cold, unrecognizable person. My mind kept replaying her words, her dismissive attitude, the smug look on her face. It was all so surreal. I tried to carry on with life as usual, but it was impossible. Everywhere I looked, I was haunted by memories of the good times we'd shared, the dreams we'd had for our future, the promises we'd made to each other. And now it was all a lie. I barely slept, tossing and turning, plagued by nightmares of Lisa and her secret life with Jake. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, only to realize it wasn't a nightmare. It was my reality. My friends noticed something was off. I'd become withdrawn, barely speaking, my mind constantly somewhere else. When they asked if I was okay, I just brushed them off, saying I was dealing with some work stress. I wasn't ready to tell anyone yet, wasn't ready to admit to the world that my marriage was crumbling because my wife couldn't keep her word, or herself, to just me. The hardest part was the silence. Lisa didn't even seem bothered by the distance growing between us. She'd come home late, barely say 2 words to me, then lock herself in the bedroom or the bathroom for hours. There was no remorse, no attempt to repair the damage she'd caused. She acted like I was nothing more than an inconvenience, an obstacle standing in the way of her fun. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I was sitting alone in the living room, staring blankly at the TV, which I'd turned on just for background noise, when I felt a wave of anger wash over me. I was tired of being the one suffering, tired of being the only one who cared. I was done letting her walk all over me while she went out and did whatever or whoever she wanted. I got up, went into the bedroom, and looked at her lying there, scrolling through her phone, completely oblivious to the turmoil she'd caused. "Lisa," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet filled with all the pain and anger I'd been holding back. "Do you even care? Do you even realize what you've done?" She looked up at me with that same indifferent gaze, sighing as if I was some annoying child. "Oh, here we go again," she said, rolling her eyes. "Can you just get over it already, Brian? I told you, I'm not here to cater to your insecurities." I was speechless. She was acting like I was the one in the wrong, like I was overreacting for being devastated by her betrayal. My chest felt tight, my throat raw with the words I wanted to scream but somehow couldn't. I just stood there, staring at her, feeling every ounce of love I had for her drain away, leaving nothing but anger, bitterness, and a cold, hollow emptiness. In that moment, I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't go on like this, couldn't keep living in a marriage that had turned into a nightmare. After that last conversation with Lisa, something inside me shifted. The sadness, the helplessness, they began to fade, replaced by a sharp, simmering anger. I realized that if she could be so callous, so heartless, then maybe I needed to stop being the nice guy who'd let himself be walked all over. She'd shattered everything we had, torn apart our marriage without a second thought, and she thought she'd just get away with it? Not a chance. I started planning, but I kept it quiet. I wanted her to think I was still reeling, still under her thumb. I pretended to go along with things, acting like I'd calmed down after our fights, even going so far as to play the part of the understanding husband when she pulled her usual disappearing act. I needed her to think I was weak, that I'd given up fighting. I wanted her to feel like she had the upper hand, because that's when people make mistakes. My first step was gathering evidence. I knew that confronting her again, without any solid proof, would just lead to more lies, more gaslighting. I needed something concrete, something undeniable that I could use to expose her and break free. So, I went through her phone while she was asleep, taking screenshots of the messages with Jake. I even managed to install a tracker on her phone, something discreet enough that she'd never notice. Over the next few days, I watched as her texts and calls with Jake continued. I saw every filthy message, every promise to meet up behind my back, every twisted joke they made at my expense. My anger grew with each new message, each little reminder of how little she thought of me, of how easily she'd betrayed me. Then, I saw the perfect opportunity for revenge. She'd messaged Jake about another party, this time at his house. She didn't know that I'd seen the message, but I knew she was planning on spending the night with him, as if I didn't even exist. She told him she'd find a way to slip out without raising my suspicions. She didn't realize I was already several steps ahead of her. On the night of the party, I told her I was going out of town for a work trip. She seemed almost gleeful, like my absence was some kind of gift to her. She barely looked up when I said goodbye, just muttered something dismissive before hurrying off to get ready for her night with Jake. As soon as I left the house, I parked my car a few blocks away and waited. I wanted to catch her in the act, to see the look on her face when she realized her little game was over. Hours passed, and eventually, I saw her leave, dressed to the nines, with a smug smile on her face. She thought she was so clever, so untouchable. I followed her to Jake's place, watching as she went inside without a second thought. My heart was pounding, my mind racing with the possibilities of what I'd do next. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more part of the plan to set in motion before I made my move. I waited outside Jake's place for what felt like hours, every nerve in my body on edge. I kept picturing Lisa and Jake inside, laughing, maybe even talking about me. Her clueless husband, the fool she thought she could keep deceiving. But little did she know, her little game was about to come crashing down. I wanted her to feel what it was like to be humiliated, betrayed, blindsided by the person she thought she knew. Once I saw the lights dim inside, I knew it was time. I made my way to the door, knocking firmly, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and cold determination. I didn't care if this looked crazy. I wanted her to see just how far she'd pushed me, to know that I was done being the quiet, forgiving husband. Jake answered the door, looking confused at first, then surprised. I could tell he recognized me from the photos Lisa must have shown him, or maybe from her phone calls, the ones she'd taken with me just a room away. He stammered, Brian, right? What are you doing here? I pushed past him without waiting for an invitation. Oh, don't mind me, Jake, I said, voice dripping with sarcasm. I just came by to check in on my wonderful wife. Heard there was a party going on that I wasn't invited to. Lisa was in the living room, lounging on the couch with a drink in hand, her legs draped casually over the armrest. She looked up, her face paling as soon as she saw me. Her drink nearly slipped from her hand as her eyes darted between me and Jake, calculating, probably scrambling for an excuse. Oh, Brian, she said, forcing a smile that was too tight, too forced. I didn't expect to see you here. I laughed, and it was a bitter, empty sound. Oh, I'm sure you didn't, Lisa. You thought I'd be miles away, didn't you? Off on my work trip, clueless as always. Well, guess what? Plans changed. Her face twisted, a flicker of annoyance crossing her expression, like she was irritated that her little rendezvous had been interrupted. But then she put on her act, the same one I'd seen too many times, the innocent, misunderstood wife. Brian, this isn't what it looks like. I was just catching up with an old friend. I held up my phone, showing her the screenshots I'd taken of her messages. Catching up? Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you were doing a whole lot more than catching up. She opened her mouth, trying to come up with some excuse, but I cut her off. Don't bother, Lisa. I saw everything. I know about the party, the messages, all of it. You don't get to lie your way out of this one. Her face went through a series of emotions. Shock, anger, and finally a look of defiance. She folded her arms, her tone turning venomous. So what, Brian? So I had a little fun on the side. Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere. Did you ever think of that? I felt my blood boil. Here she was, caught in the act, and she still had the audacity to blame me, to twist this around like it was somehow my fault. But I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. I was done with her games, her lies, her twisted justifications. Oh, I've thought about it, Lisa, I said, my voice icy. And you know what? You're right. I have been boring. Boring enough to stay faithful. Boring enough to give you every ounce of trust and respect. And this is how you repay me? With Jake. I gestured towards him, who was standing there, looking like he wanted to disappear into the walls. She sneered. Oh, please, don't act like you're some kind of saint. You never gave me any excitement. You never challenged me. Jake actually knows how to have a good time, unlike you. At that moment, I knew there was nothing left to salvage. This wasn't the woman I'd fallen in love with. She was a stranger to me now, someone who'd willingly destroyed everything we'd built together and had the gall to blame me for it. The words stung, but in a way they also set me free. Standing there, hearing her blatant disregard for everything we'd shared, everything we'd built, I felt an odd sense of clarity. I knew what I had to do, and I was ready to finally break free from her lies and manipulation. She didn't deserve the loyalty, the love, or the stability I'd given her. And now I was going to make sure she'd regret throwing it all away. I took a deep breath, looked her straight in the eyes and said, You know what, Lisa? You're absolutely right. I've been boring. And it's time I did something about that. With that, I turned to Jake, who looked like a deer caught in headlights. So, Jake, I said, feigning a friendly tone, did Lisa ever tell you about our little arrangement? His eyes widened in confusion. Arrangement? Oh, didn't she mention? Lisa and I have been talking about starting an open relationship, I said, enjoying the bewildered look on both their faces. In fact, I've been seeing someone too. Someone who actually respects me and knows what it means to be loyal. It was a lie, but I could see it hit Lisa like a punch to the gut. For the first time, she looked genuinely shocked, and maybe even hurt. "What?" she sputtered, her face twisting with a mix of disbelief and anger. You're seeing someone else?" I smirked. "Yes, Lisa. And unlike you, I actually kept it discreet. I respected what we had, even when I knew it was falling apart. But after seeing how little you care, I realized there's no point in pretending anymore." She stared at me, her face a mix of rage and betrayal. It was almost laughable. Here was the woman who had lied to me, humiliated me, and betrayed me without a second thought. And now she had the audacity to be angry that I might have moved on? Jake, meanwhile, was looking more and more uncomfortable. He shifted his weight, clearly realizing that this wasn't just some affair, but something far more complicated than he'd bargained for. "Look, maybe I should." "Oh no, Jake, don't go," I interrupted, keeping my voice cold and composed. "You're part of this now. You both are." I held up my phone again, this time recording a video. "Smile, Lisa. Say hi to the camera. Let's make a nice little memory of this moment, so you can look back on it and remember how you threw everything away." Her face paled, and she lunged toward me, trying to snatch the phone from my hand, but I stepped back, keeping it just out of reach. "What the hell are you doing, Brian?" she hissed, her voice filled with venom. "Just making sure I have proof, Lisa. Proof that you were never the victim here, no matter what story you try to spin to our friends or family. I'm done letting you control the narrative." I could see the panic starting to set in. She knew what this meant. Our friends, her family, even her precious social circle would see her for what she really was. All those lies she'd told, the fake innocence she'd maintained, would unravel. And I could tell that terrified her. Before she could respond, I hit send, sharing the video with a few close friends and family members. Her eyes widened, and she reached out, trying to grab my arm, desperation finally replacing the arrogance she'd shown me earlier. "Brian, please," she said, her tone shifting from anger to pleading. "Don't do this. We can work this out. I was framed. I didn't mean to hurt you. It was an accident." I laughed, the sound bitter and hollow. "An accident, Lisa? You accidentally lied to my face. Accidentally snuck around with Jake? Accidentally destroyed our marriage? No. You made a choice, and now you get to live with it." Jake muttered something about needing to step outside, but I ignored him. My focus was on Lisa, watching as the reality of her situation finally hit her. Her bravado crumbled, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. I leaned in close, keeping my voice low. "You know, Lisa, I thought you were the one I'd spend the rest of my life with. I thought you'd be the mother of my kids, that we'd grow old together. But you destroyed all of that. And the best part? I've already found someone else. Someone who doesn't treat me like an afterthought." With that, I turned and walked out, leaving her standing there, her face pale and her eyes wide with the realization of what she'd lost. Walking away from Lisa and Jake's place felt like shedding a weight I'd been carrying for far too long. For the first time in months, I felt free. The anger, the betrayal, they were still there, but now they felt manageable, like something I could finally move past. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was in control. Over the next few days, the messages started pouring in. Friends and family reached out, shocked at what had happened. Some couldn't believe it, while others admitted they'd noticed changes in Lisa over the past few years but hadn't wanted to say anything. The story spread quickly, and soon everyone knew the truth. There was no hiding for Lisa now. I heard through mutual friends that she was devastated, constantly calling people to try to explain herself, spinning story after story, trying to paint me as the bad guy. She told anyone who would listen that I'd been emotionally distant or too controlling. But no one was buying it. The video, the texts, it was all out there. Her lies were crumbling, and she had no one left to blame but herself. Despite everything, I still had moments where I questioned myself, wondering if there was something I could have done differently, some way I could have saved our marriage. But every time those thoughts crept in, I remembered the look on her face when she told me she was going to do whatever she wanted. She hadn't cared then, She didn't care about me, about us, or about the life we'd built. The woman I'd loved was gone, replaced by someone who valued thrill over loyalty, lies over love. It wasn't easy. The loneliness hit hard at first, especially in the quiet moments. Nights were the worst, coming home to an empty house, knowing that the person I'd once shared it with was out there, probably still finding ways to blame me for everything that had happened. But I'd remind myself that I'd done the right thing, that letting go was the only way to reclaim my peace. Slowly, I started focusing on myself, on the things I'd neglected while I was busy trying to hold a sinking ship together. I reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with, went back to the gym, and threw myself into my work. Each day felt like a small step forward, a step away from the man I'd been, the man who'd allowed himself to be manipulated and lied to. And yes, I met someone new. Her name was Emily. She was a friend of a friend, someone I'd met by chance at a small get-together. She was kind, genuine, and most importantly, honest. There were no games, no lies, just simple, straightforward connection. With her, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: respect. She respected me, valued me for who I was, and that was something Lisa had never given me. As things with Emily began to blossom, I realized just how toxic my relationship with Lisa had been. I'd spent so much time bending over backward, trying to keep her happy, trying to be the perfect husband, that I'd lost sight of my own worth. With Emily, I didn't feel the need to prove myself or chase after her approval. I could just be myself, and that was enough. Looking back, I saw how blind I'd been, how I'd ignored all the signs that had been right in front of me. But I wasn't angry anymore. In a strange way, I was grateful for the experience. It had forced me to confront my own insecurities, my own fears, and, most importantly, my own strength. As I sit here, months removed from that whirlwind of betrayal and heartbreak, I feel like a different person. Stronger, wiser, and more aware of my own value. It's incredible how much a single experience can reshape your entire perspective. I used to think relationships were all about sacrifice, about bending over backward to make the other person happy. But now I know it's about balance, about two people who respect and value each other equally. If there's one piece of advice I'd give to anyone going through something similar, it's this: trust your instincts. Looking back, the signs were all there. I just didn't want to see them. I made excuses, telling myself that Lisa was just going through a phase, that it was stress from work or our routines getting stale. But the truth was simpler. She didn't respect me, and she didn't care about our marriage. It took a brutal wake-up call for me to see it. But once I did, I realized there was no going back. Another thing I learned is that sometimes we stay in toxic relationships because of fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of losing the life we built. But here's the reality. Holding on to something that's slowly destroying you is far worse than facing those fears. Walking away was hard, but it was also liberating. I felt like I'd finally given myself permission to be happy again, to live without constantly wondering if I was good enough or if I was boring. Leaving Lisa was like pulling a splinter from my skin. It hurt at first, but then I felt nothing but relief. And as hard as it was to watch the fallout, as painful as it was to see the life I'd known crumble, I realized that it was necessary. Sometimes you have to let everything burn to start fresh. Sometimes you need to walk through the fire to find your way back to yourself. In a strange way, I'm grateful to Lisa for showing me who she really was. Without her betrayal, I might have spent the rest of my life doubting myself, bending over backward to keep someone happy who didn't deserve my loyalty. I'd have been a shell of the person I am now, constantly sacrificing my own happiness for someone who treated it with contempt. So, if you're reading this and you're feeling trapped, feeling like you're losing yourself to someone who doesn't appreciate you, know that you deserve better. Know that it's okay to let go, to walk away, to demand respect. You don't have to settle for someone who treats you like an afterthought, like a convenience they can pick up and discard whenever they please. Life's too short to waste on people who don't value you. Now, with Emily, I've learned what a real relationship feels like. There's no manipulation, no deceit, just trust, respect, and genuine connection. She's shown me that love doesn't have to be a battlefield, that it doesn't have to be filled with mind games and suspicion. With her, I finally feel safe, valued, and understood. Reflecting on everything, I can't say I have any regrets. I learned from the pain and I came out stronger on the other side. And for anyone reading this, going through their own nightmare of betrayal, remember that there is light at the end of this tunnel. You'll come out stronger, too. Trust yourself, value yourself, and don't settle for anything less than what you truly deserve. In the end, I guess the lesson is simple. Love yourself enough to walk away from anyone who doesn't love you back. Because there's someone out there who will see your worth, who won't treat you like an option, and who will give you the respect and loyalty you deserve. It took a painful experience for me to learn that, but I'm grateful for the journey, even if it was a hard one. Thank you to everyone who took the time to read this. I hope my story helps someone out there realize that they're not alone, that they're stronger than they think, and that life after betrayal can be better than you ever imagined.